Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Remixing Politics and Culture with me, your host, Pam. I am a public relations and marketing professional with a passion for social justice, voter advocacy, and culture. And I thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me this evening. We have an interesting and important topic to discuss this evening. And we're going to be discussing specifically Christian nationalism and why it matters. I think that for many of us, and certainly for a lot of believers, on the surface, when you hear that term, you think, well, maybe it's talking about Christian values and the faith or something of that nature because of the word Christian in front of it. But my guest tonight is about to school us all on Christian nationalism and more. And you'll soon learn what I mean by more in just a moment. My special guest this evening is the Reverend Dr. Jonathan C. Augustine, and we call him Pastor J. I'm going to bring him up as I talk about him a bit. There he is.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening. He is an author, law professor, general chaplain of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. He is a visiting professor of law at North Carolina Central University School of Law and a consulting faculty member at Duke University Divinity School, where he is also a member of the Board of Visitors and a missional strategist with the Center for Reconciliation. He is the husband to Michelle and the father of two college students, both enrolled in college now, Mason and Jillian. He is the senior pastor of the historic St. Joseph AME Church in Durham, North Carolina, and recently he was inducted into the Morehouse College Martin Luther King Board of Preachers. I am so proud to say that he is my pastor. Welcome back to the show, Pastor J.
Bless you, my sister. Bless you. Thank you so much for the honor of being with you tonight. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, initially, I was going to open up with this broad question just for you to teach us what Christian nationalism is and what it isn't and all of that. But then, you guys, I started really looking into his second book, When Prophets Preach, Leadership and the Politics of the Pulpit. And I think that when I read this little section to you, you'll understand a little bit about him and why he is so social justice minded and why he is the perfect guest to explain to us what Christian nationalism is. I have to tell you all that the foreword of this book was written by none other than Bishop William J. Barber II. Okay. So now, okay, here it is. All right. You say in your book, Karl Barth's well-known and time-honored expression, the preacher should preach with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other, advocates for prophetic preaching by metaphorically placing an emphasis on the importance of making the Bible's lessons applicable to contemporary times. In the image of Jesus, therefore, 21st century prophetic preachers should live out Barth's advice by breaking the pulpit silence and speaking to matters like those of social justice, just as Jesus would if he were preaching today. Pastor J. Whew, okay.
Thank you, Sister Pam.
Explain to us what it means to be a prophetic preacher of the gospel.
Yeah, I think it is so important, and I think it is understated, regrettably understated in this day and age, and it's so very needed. Prophetic preaching, when you think about it doctrinally, it is a part of a leadership paradigm that is often called the Monas Triplex Doctrine, or some call it the threefold office. You look at the ministry of Jesus as the ultimate exemplar of a prophet, of a priest, and of a king, or as a royal, to put it in non-gender specific terms. When you think about the royal or the kingly leadership. You think about somebody who sets a direction, somebody who says, this is the way we want to move, follow me, right? Somebody who gives leadership and foresight and vision. When you think about priestly leadership, you think about someone who is conciliatory. You think about the typical minister who visits the sick, who buries the dead. But when you think about prophetic leadership, the subject of what we are this evening, you really are thinking about somebody who speaks truth to power and oftentimes speaks truth to institutions of power. That really was part of the ministry of Jesus. He brought to fruition, following the example of many of the prophets of old. It's a willingness to stand up against the status quo. A quote you referenced from Karl Barth, preaching with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. When you think about the biblical narrative, it really is a story about a marginalized group of people, Jews who were ethnically marginalized because culturally they were different or religiously they were different from the diminutive Roman Empire. And it is a story of a series of heroes who stood up to speak truth to power. And again, that's what part of what Jesus's ministry was all about. So in the current day context, when we look at how so many immigrants are marginalized, when we look at how so many minorities are marginalized, including African Americans, it is a call for believers to preach prophetically and to preach social justice, because we really are all God's children.
Amen. Amen. We collectively really are all God's children. And with that said, I need for you to explain to us, we'll get into what exactly is Christian nationalism, Pastor Jay.
Yeah, its roots are very old. Its roots are literally as old as the Republic itself, and it has become much more popularized in recent years. And I'll tell you, if I were trying a case, I have a bar card in my back pocket, right? I pull it out only in case of emergency. But if I were back trying a case now, and I would say Exhibit A would be the January 6th insurrection, where you saw protesters, insurrectionists who literally were waving flags, who were wearing T-shirts and wearing sweatshirts that said, "Jesus is my savior, Trump is my president."
Right.
When you think about that conflation, that very dangerous conflation of cross and country, it really has less to do with orthodoxy. It has less to do with Christian fundamentalism or Christian doctrine and teaching, but it has everything to do with a political ideology that brings cross and country together, that says America is a Christian nation. It is part of divine providence, if you will, part of God's chosen order, that America functions the way it was set up to function. And when you go back to America's origins and you think in the Northeast about the Puritans, they came to America to rid us of Catholicism, to rid us of that which had infiltrated the Anglican Church of England. When you think about the South, when you think about slavery and the religion of a lost cause, people believed America was set up with a diminutive white power structure that marginalized African Americans, obviously in chattel slavery. And when you think about America's westward expansion as part of manifest destiny, there was a belief that a belief in American exceptionalism, a belief that America was destined to take over as a diminutive power, as quote unquote God's chosen people. It is very hierarchical. It very much puts white Anglo-Saxon Protestantism at the top of the food chain, and any and everything else takes a subservient position. That means immigrants certainly take a subservient position. It means Jews take a subservient position. It means Muslims take a subservient position. Anything that is not white Anglo-Saxon Protestantism. So we obviously have seen that play out time and time again as part of the Make America Great Again narrative. It is something that is deeply rooted into the American fabric, and it's very dangerous. It is arguably the most dangerous threat to American democracy.
Absolutely. Absolutely, it is. I'm worried that when you look at how things are going, we're constantly having a slow, it's almost like in slow motion of rolling back rights in the state legislatures across the South, and what have you. And it looks like the two brothers in Tennessee are just hanging on by a thread. It seems like every time I look around, I mean, one has even been assaulted, but what could he do? I mean, it wasn't much that he could do. I mean, who was he going to report it to? Nobody was going to do anything. We're
Sure.
in such a bizarre time, and I don't know. Would you say it's because of Christian nationalism is why we're in this situation? And how do we get ourselves out of it?
So Christian nationalism, again, is very divisive because it's very hierarchical. It is an inherent belief that God intended America to be set up a certain way racially, with a certain group being in diminutive power over others. It's a belief that there is a governing structure in America, that it is a quote unquote Christian nation, and it fails to recognize the origins of the First Amendment tell us that America is anything but a Christian nation. If we were to look at America's population, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but if we were to look at America's population, no doubt more than 50% or a majority of Americans may adhere to Christianity, those who still identify with a faith belief, right? So that may mean the majority of our country subscribes to Christian principles, but America is not. It's the farthest thing from a Christian nation. There is no such thing as a consolidated a church and state. That is something we obviously fought against as part of the Revolutionary War to get away from that diminutive power as part of our ancestry from England, or part of our history from England. But the influence there is very, very divisive. So part of the problems that we're experiencing obviously are because of the division. Many of the divisions have been exasperated in recent years with the Make America Great Again narrative. And let me be clear, Make America Great Again is an expression that was popularized in the 2016, obviously 2020, and here again 2024 presidential elections because of a particular candidate, but it is not limited to that candidate. It is part of a mindset that is very regressive and attempts to take America back to a darker day, again, where there was a clear hierarchy in terms of who's in charge of in America that usually adheres to Christian nationalistic principles.
What I'm concerned with, Pastor Jay, is that, at least back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, what have you, as we were going through our civil rights revolution, we had structure within churches to do the work of organizing, of getting people together, of leadership and whatnot. I know our church does because we have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
When you look at in Durham, we are the church that does that type of thing, that type of organizing, because that's who everybody looks to. My issue is it can't just be one. It has to be a consolidation of many. How do we reclaim that? How do we get that back?
In chapter 1 of When Prophets Preach, I asked the question, the title of the chapter is, when does the church get political? And there are a series of steps, if you will, check marks, checkpoints to determine when there is an appropriate mix between the pastor as the congregation's leader, the congregation in terms of its ideology, and in terms of a willingness to utilize its resources to be quote unquote political. Now, let me make a point of distinction. The book draws a clear line between what is political and what is partisan. I believe Christianity is inherently political because if we are followers of Christ, Jesus was very, very political, meaning he was concerned about the allocation of resources. He was concerned about fairness and equity as part of a marginalized social class, a group marginalized based on ethnicity, as a Jew living under the diminutive empire of Pontius Pilate. So Christianity is inherently political because it was founded not just for salvation in the kingdom to come, if you can think about the north-south, the vertical axis of the cross, but it was also founded to address social inequities in the kingdom at hand. So Christianity is political, but I draw a distinction between being political and being partisan. There is no way we're endorsing particular candidates for office. There's no way we're endorsing the color red or the color blue for your voting preferences, but we are talking about issues that matter to people. I'm so glad that we have a mix of pastor and parishioner at St. Joseph that says we are a political church. that says people do look to us to lead in politics. That is wonderful, because I feel quite at home with the people at St. Joseph. And I think the people at St. Joseph have wrapped their arms and figuratively embraced me as the prophetic leader of the church. Not all congregations have that mix, though. Some pastors are a little reluctant to be political, perhaps because of misinformation. Well, I don't want to lose my 501c3 status. You won't, as long as you're advocating issues, as long as you're talking about concerns of your people. The only time you lose 501c3 status is when you become partisan and you endorse particular candidates, or you do things to support particular matters that are not political, but again, that are obviously partisan. So it's got to be a healthy mix of pastor and parishioners in order to make for a political church to address social justice issues.
Okay. So, Pastor Jay, one of the things that we know is a fact that has happened across the country, we've seen the stats that it says that millennials and other younger people, I guess the Gen Zs and whatnot, aren't coming to church. And I know that, and a lot of them are choosing the more worship style church that is more of like the mega church format, what have you. Within your book, you kind of mentioned a little bit about the mega churches and what have you. Tell us what your thoughts are on those.
Mega churches are there to be vanilla, to make everybody happy. It is a focus on praise parties for Jesus, and not a focus on prophetic matters to address social justice issues. So I do recognize that mega churches, because there's so many people, it looks as though young people are gravitating to them. But the literature really says, though, that we're living in what scholars call a postmodern era, postmodernity, where people question faith more so than accepting faith. Church attendance and church affiliation is really down across the United States of America and compared to what it was just a couple of decades ago, for sure. But I feel as though young people, my daughter is a sophomore in college now, soon to be going into her junior year. When I think about her generation, they may not necessarily be attracted to steeples and stained glass, but the principles of social justice, the principles of fairness and equity, those are things that certainly they are attracted to. So I believe if churches address those matters, they will be attracted to the ministry, if you will, if I can use that term, a ministry of social justice, whether it's community service and feeding the homeless and doing clothing drives, or voter registration matters, or advocating early voting. Those are some of the ways we, as you well know, pack the pews at St. Joseph when we focus on social justice issues. So I believe young people are drawn more so to mission than quote unquote ministry, as we were in years past.
I agree. And I noticed that when we have things very specific for them, they will come, because we do have parents and family that will encourage them to come forward and do things. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How do you as a pastor in the church universal encourage other preachers to become prophetic preachers and not just be vanilla?
Yeah, it is. It's a special calling. It is. I would say honestly, the 2017 to 2021, obviously January 6th was a turning point, I think, for the country in terms of where democracy was and the threat to take democracy away. But the administration of Donald Trump, I think, if you were not turned to the direction of preaching prophetically, then shame on you. It brought out Christian nationalism in the highest regard. So there's some people who decided to bring American flags in their sanctuaries and says this is God's chosen nation. This is God's chosen leader. As he self-anointed himself, I'm the chosen one. I am the chosen one, right? But when you think about all the harm that was done to our immigrant siblings, when you think about the vilification of so many people who look just like us, when you think about the police brutality that was enacted, we should have never heard the name Ahmaud Arbery. He should have been able to finish his afternoon jog. When you think about Breonna Taylor and rogue police officers who executed a no-knock warrant in Louisville, Kentucky, when you think obviously about George Floyd and the horrific death that he met in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Those matters, if you go back to what you shared earlier, really Karl Barth preaching with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other, those matters are calls or clarion calls for prophetic preaching and for prophetic leadership to, again, speak truth to power and speak truth to institutions of power.
Right.
Any preachers that do not fulfill that mission of Jesus the Christ are preaching a truncated gospel.
All right. Truncated gospel. And so and so with this truncated gospel, and people wanting to follow the flashy things, the churches that have all of the theatrics, and you know what it is for me, Pastor, it's almost like everybody wants to be entertained 24/7. It's never where you can read a book, read a scripture, or just, some things aren't always going to be entertainment.
Sure.
How do we combat that? Oh, some question. Okay. How do we combat that? And then we're going to get you to answer this question.
Sure, absolutely. I like to think of, particularly in our denomination, I'm very proud to have been ordained and obviously to serve in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. It is a denomination that was born in protest, a denomination that was born to fight for social and racial equity, to open doors in a pioneering fashion for education for African Americans, to give opportunities in the past where obstacles were present, right? To turn obstacles into opportunities, I should say. Part of the diet, if you will, in our liturgy and our seasons throughout the year. Certainly there are times of celebration. Easter is a time of celebration. The Easter season, when you think about it, when Jesus makes the post-resurrection appearances, those certainly are times of celebration. But our liturgical diet also recognizes times of lament, times where we come honestly with the fact that life is not easy. There is nothing that was promised to us aside from the fact God would not leave us and God would not forsake us, right? So a pastor who only preaches the good news as in happy times, again, that's part of a truncated gospel, who is not balancing out the hard times with the assuredness that God will not forsake you, that is not a full gospel. That's somebody who's only trying to please you and trying to make you happy with a praise party for Jesus. But that is not the full gospel. So I think it is incumbent upon, and certainly is taught in seminaries across America, to have a balanced liturgical diet in terms of preaching. Some preachers subscribe to, and I'm one of them, the lectionary, where there are biblical texts that take you throughout each and every season, liturgical season of the year, to focus thematically on different things. And so I think it's important to have a healthy diet, not just to have an abundance of sweets, if you will, the good news, but you have to have a healthy diet, meaning you have to have your vegetables too.
All right. So here's a question from Sincere. Do you see there being a difference between white nationalists and Christian nationalists?
So the two often are hand in hand. Scholars, including myself, use Christian nationalism is often white Christian nationalism because of its hierarchical nature.
Okay.
So Christian nationalism in and of itself, as I mentioned, is a conflation of cross and country. It says that America is on par with Israel, if you will, for the Bible. America is God's chosen nation, and there's a certain way that God intended things to be in America, with white Anglo-Saxon Protestantism at the top of the social food chain, if you will. It is often called white Christian nationalism because of that very hierarchical nature, where whiteness is looked at as supreme and everything else is subservient to whiteness. So the two oftentimes are used synonymously.
Okay. So, Pastor Jay, what would you say? How would you explain, if there is an explanation, for the person using Donald Trump as being the chosen leader for America, and also saying that we are a Christian nation when he is anything but?
That certainly is my political perspective, and obviously I think it's your political perspective, but individuals are entitled to their perspectives, and we're entitled to vote, right?
Right.
The problem I have with Trump and with the Make America Great Again narrative, because of the hierarchical nature of Christian nationalism, it
Mhm.
has attempted to marginalize citizen participation by saying who can vote. It's an
Right.
attempt to leave the power of democracy in the hands of the few rather than in the hands of the many. And we see it play out time and time again in politics that are offensive to minorities, politics that are offensive to Jews, politics that are offensive to Muslims, those who are not, those who do not fit squarely within the box of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants.
Mhm.
Time and time again in North Carolina, as you lifted up, we are the poster child, regrettably, for voter suppression laws, for photo ID laws that are targeted at African Americans. Who could forget a few years back, the U.S. Fourth Circuit Court of Appeal ruled that our General Assembly acted in the most unconstitutional manner, targeting African Americans with surgical precision in attempts to limit our power and our ability to participate in the democratic process. So I have no problem with a voter who says Donald Trump is my choice. If that's your choice, that's your choice.
Right.
But all choices should be heard, and all people should be able to participate at the polling place. And I have problems with the politics that limit who has the opportunity to participate. That has been a deliberate part, regrettably, of what Christian nationalism is and how it manifests in an attempt, again, to vest power in the hands of a few rather than in the hands of many.
Okay. All right. Pastor Jay, explain to us from your divinity background, Jesus's ministry of salvation and social justice were inherently political, you say in your book.
Absolutely. I really think there is a great, you mentioned the foreword to the book that Dr. William Barber did.
Yeah,
It really is a sermonette,
it
and
is.
it's a sermonette, and he takes us to church, as they say,
Yeah.
and it is really a look at Luke 4:18 and 19. And if you think about it in context, that is Jesus's inaugural sermon, if you will. It's
Hmm.
the beginning of Jesus's public ministry. And Jesus says, I'm paraphrasing, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He's called me to bring good news to the poor, to give sight to the blind, to set the captives free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor.
Hmm.
When you look at that in context, again, as Jesus was a socially marginalized Jew, someone who was marginalized because of his ethnicity and because of the way he worshiped and because of what he believed, he was culturally pushed to the periphery. Jesus came as a liberator, not just to address salvation in the kingdom to come, but clearly to address social inequities in the kingdom at hand. So Christianity itself is a religion that was born in protest because of social conditions, but certainly born to bring about salvation for salvific conditions. So Jesus was both a social liberator and a spiritual liberator, and that he fulfilled divine ministry. You cannot limit Christianity to just talk about pie in the sky.
Right.
You got to be able to talk about giving a good meal, 3 squares and a cot down here in the kingdom at hand, not just in the kingdom to come, right?
Yeah.
So it is a truncated gospel, if you will, if you focus only on salvation in the kingdom to come and don't look at the social inequities that exist here in the kingdom at hand. That's not the fulfillment of how Jesus's ministry was lived out for the 3 years he was in public ministry.
This is going a little tangential. So, how did we get to this whole prosperity preaching situation? How did that happen?
Yeah, name it and claim it, right?
No, I don't know
Some
how that happened.
some people have. I'm trying to be choice with my words here.
Mm.
God wants you to be happy. God wants you. God is there for you to overcome all things, and God wants you to be happy. God wants you not only to survive your situation, but God wants you to prosper. So if
Mhm.
you're just willing to give me some money, I'm going to pray for you, and then that means you're going to prosper, right?
Right.
Regrettably, we have had prosperity preachers time and time again to promote their own financial interests and their own pecuniary interests, preaching a truncated gospel and telling people what they want to hear more so than telling them the real good news and the unadulterated good news. Jesus is not somebody who lived in a mansion.
No.
Jesus is somebody who was a poor person, who was the son of a carpenter, whose mother was a teenage mother who, from all indications, did not have an education, did not have vocational training, but he lived out again certainly a spiritual ministry when you think about the kingdom to come, but he lived out a ministry for social justice, addressing issues of marginalization here in the kingdom at hand. So regrettably, we've had a few very popular wolves in sheep clothing that have taken us off the rails in terms of what Christianity is supposed to look like. But that is not the full gospel. The full gospel is a balanced diet. It's not just the sweets. Again, it's the vegetables too.
It's the vegetables too. Sincere says, wealth, health, and prosperity preachers are con men. Her opinion.
Preach. Preach.
All right. So, Pastor, connecting the present and the past by the need for prophetic preaching. What is that about?
More so now, arguably, than ever before. Prophetic preaching is something obviously that I practice, is something that obviously I write about, but it certainly is not something that I have originated. When you go back and you look at the biblical canon, again, the Old Testament is a narrative about a marginalized group of people. Time and time again, when people stood up to speak truth to institutions of power, going back to begin with Moses, when he stood up to Pharaoh and said, as I like to jokingly say, let my people vote. I mean, let my people go, right? So the biblical narrative goes on and on with prophetic leaders who address the social circumstances of their day. In this day and age, when we think about how far America has gone off the rails, when we think about how many people are marginalized because of race, because of ethnicity, because of sexual orientation, whatever the case may be, prophetic leadership is a call for social justice. It's a call to say that we really are all God's children, and to fulfill that perspective by preaching equality and by standing up again to institutions of power that would dare discriminate against people because they are different. It's a call to speak against xenophobia. It's a call to speak against otherism. And it's a call to recognize that all of us are equals in an egalitarian concept, and we all should accept and respect one another. And if you can't agree, there's no reason you have to be disagreeable. Prophetic preachers are called to share that good news with the world.
Okay, so Pastor, are you opening up a school of teaching prophetic preaching? That's what everybody wants to know.
There's so many others that have done it long before me. I'm just proud to be categorized as one during this time, during this day and age, as a prophetic leader. Martin Luther King Jr. had a famous quote, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. For the time period, for the very finite time period for his 39 years, obviously he spent from age 26 when he accepted the pastorate to age 39 when an assassin's bullet called him home to be with the Lord. He accepted that time period to be engaged in prophetic ministry and led a charge for social justice. The good Lord has called me with a background as a lawyer, obviously with theological training, obviously as a writer and as a pastor, for this finite time, whatever the time will be, for this time of the dash, if you will, to do the same. There are many others that have done so as part of that moral arc. And when my time is done, there'll be many others that will do so after me. I certainly pray so, because we need prophets to stand up to speak truth to power.
Amen. Because, all of the Duke just announced how they were getting rid of their special scholarship they had for Black students. And you know how expensive Duke is.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And what have you.
I know all too well. There are a couple of Duke cups behind me here. Duke, yes, I know all too well how expensive Duke is. Absolutely.
Right. And so, and so many of the DEI efforts are being rolled back, disappearing. All of those things that we gained during the George Floyd revolution, so to speak, when that happened. And so many corporations are going back on their word. How can the church help in that effort?
I'm a shameless plug, and forgive you me. The predecessor to When Prophets Preach, which was published in 2023, was a book published in 2022 called to Reconciliation. Thank you, Sister Pam. My PR is right there. Thank you so much. Called to Reconciliation, how the church can model justice, diversity, and inclusion. If the church is really in the business of both saving souls, salvation in the kingdom to come, and addressing matters of social equity in the kingdom at hand, the church has got to be about problem solving. Well, literature tells us that when we bring diverse groups together, we solve problems at a much, much faster rate than when it's a homogeneous group. When you think about diversity and what diversity really means, I write about it in Call to Reconciliation in terms of cognitive diversity and identity diversity. So cognitive diversity says different people from different disciplines or different people who have been exposed to different things will process information differently and will solve problems differently in terms of their thinking. Just like identity diversity says that because I self-identify as a straight Black man from the South, I will approach problems in a particular way. Someone else who is a gay Mexican-American woman from the Northeast, someone else, and obviously it's multi-layered, it's multi-nuanced, or any number of variations there, but people who have different social experiences based on how they self-identify will address problems differently too. Well, when you bring both cognitive processing and processing in terms of your social identities together, problems are solved much, much more quickly. How about we work together to solve problems of food insecurity? How about we work together to solve problems of global warming? Those are the kind of matters the church is supposed to be engaged in embracing diversity rather than castigating people who are different and categorized as the proverbial other. The church is supposed to be about diversity, and it can certainly model diversity for the rest of the world.
What do you say to those people who are in the evangelical? See, that's the problem. The word evangelical, the terminology makes people who have a very straightforward way of thinking, there's no shades of gray for them. They can't, I think, really perceive the nuances of what people are saying or doing when they're using Christian nationalism, we're evangelical, blah 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 blah. So many of them are just they shut down totally to the notion that if it's not white, it's not right. If somebody is gay, we can't talk to them. We have to shun them or whatever. How do we? Is there any way to fix that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I think, regrettably, again, that arc of the moral universe, this particular time, arguably since 1976, certainly 1980 with the election of Ronald Reagan, but 1976 was called the year of the evangelical. That's Jimmy Carter, a self-described evangelical Christian. When you look pre-1976, when you really look historically, particularly in the 19th century, 18th and 19th century, evangelicals were abolitionists. Evangelicals were social activists who were on the right side of history, who worked toward freeing those who were enslaved. So evangelicals were very progressive because the root word there speaks to the good news. I write quite a bit about evangelicals in When Prophets Preach. We had sort of a turnabout, almost a 180, because of Jimmy Carter's very progressive policies on school integration. And you had a certain segment of evangelicals who decided we're going to manufacture an issue to create a wall here and now turn on Carter. And that issue, of course, became Roe v. Wade. Became the right to an abortion. So the 1980 presidential election, evangelicals, with the help of a certain segment in the South, decided Jerry Falwell, among others, Jerry Falwell, among a few others, decided that they would court Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan, being a very, very astute politician, decided he would court them too. He famously spoke at a 1980 conference prior to the election that year saying, "I know you can't endorse me, but I most certainly endorse you." The two got married. So if there's ever been a dependable voting block, statistics show from 1980, certainly through 2016, evangelical Christians have voted Republican overwhelmingly, usually on that issue of Roe v. Wade. I think now, post 2016, post 2020, some people have buyer's remorse with respect to Donald Trump because of the extremity of what Trumpism represents, which is not necessarily synonymous with what Republicans have historically represented, right? So I think we're chartering new territory now So it's an opportunity for evangelicals to determine Roe v. Wade is over, right? That's overturned. So now you told us what you're against for all this time. Tell us now what you're for.
Right. I've got a couple of comments in the chat. Let's see. Sincere. Since y'all brought up DEI and the SCOTUS eliminating race-based admissions, now race-based anything, can we get American descendants of slavery to focus on lineage-based solutions? And she has, quote, harm-based.
Yeah, lineage-based solutions. I take that, or I infer that to mean reparations. I certainly write about reparations, and I think it's chapter 3 of When Prophets Preach, and looking historically, a promise that was made, of course, of 40 acres and a mule, a promise that was made through the Freedmen's Bureau, the person who is the namesake of my alma mater, Howard University, General Oliver Otis Howard, was in charge of the Freedmen's Bureau. He asked a group of ministers, chief among them Garrison Frazier, what is it we can do economically now to stabilize the South and to help your people to get on their feet? They said land, and the quotient that came up was 40 acres and a mule, and that was what the Freedmen's Bureau was supposed to have institutionalized. Of course, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Andrew Johnson, who was a Southerner, who was a slaveholder from Tennessee, comes to power, and he did not know Joseph. To put it in a biblical language, he knew nothing of what you said, and he didn't want anything to do with that. So he absolutely not. So reparations never came to pass. So I don't know that is forthcoming now. I'd be more optimistic if we could pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and to make sure that the protections of the Voting Rights Act are made permanent. So I'm not optimistic that reparations is on the table now, but again, the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice. So I would encourage your viewer there, or our viewer, to please stay in the fight. Don't lose hope. We need all hands on deck to fight for fairness and equity in America.
All right, here's another one. Pastor Jay, I believe that those who once had all power will never accept us as equal and still say they are Christians and follow Christ's teachings.
Yeah, sometimes in sermons when I'm talking about things that are quote unquote controversial, where there clearly are, you look at the same thing, the same biblical text, for example, and people interpret it in two dramatically different ways. I have jocularly, in a jocular fashion, asked the question, which Jesus are you talking about? Or which Jesus are you talking about? We live in an America now that is so very polarized that, again, I can look at Jesus as somebody who was socially marginalized and someone who came to socially liberate. And others would say, oh, don't give me the politics. Just tell me what Jesus said. Okay, I'm sorry. If we're reading the same book, Jesus was saying a whole lot about the politics of his day because he was addressing issues of fairness and equity for his people who were marginalized and pushed to the social periphery. So to imagine and say Jesus was only about salvation and was not about social justice, again, that's not a historically accurate picture. Aubrey Hendricks is a wonderful author who wrote a book called The Politics of Jesus, which is on the shelf back here somewhere. I cite The Politics of Jesus in When Prophets Preach. And in so many words, Aubrey Hendricks asked the question, who domesticated my Lord? Because Jesus was a rebel in his day, and any attempt to look at him in a way other than that excludes the rebellious nature, meaning rebellious against the social norms of his day, is not a full and authentic look at Jesus the Christ.
Okay. So Pastor Jam, I ask you this part in your book. America's climate of Christian nationalism requires a prophetic response.
Prophets should stand up today. When people are marginalized because of their ancestry, the prophet must stand up. When people are marginalized because of their ethnicity, the prophet must stand up. When people are marginalized because of their migrant status or immigrant status, the prophet must stand up. If you really follow through with the core principles of fairness and equity that resound throughout the biblical narrative, that is the common thread throughout the biblical narrative of a people who are adversely affected and who have been adversely marginalized, and they call on God for help in the struggle for social liberation, That story goes on. That story is continuing right here and right now in 2024 as we look at the politics of America. Somebody's got to stand up. William Barber's doing a wonderful job. God love him for it, but he can't do it alone. There have got to be others who have got to be willing to stand up too. Again, I humbly consider myself to be a part of a prophetic leadership tradition. I hope, and I know, let me say, I know I won't be the last. I know when my race is run, there'll be others who are ready to run the race too. Just like there are so many others who have run before me, and there are so many others who are running contemporaneously with me. We need more and more people to stand up and realize that faith is an action word. Faith doesn't just mean an abstract concept of something that's held in your heart. Faith is something that's lived out in your experiences and how you treat other people and how you advocate on behalf of Matthew 25, the least of these.
The least, absolutely. Here's another comment from Sincere. Okay, that wasn't that one. Okay, here it is. Yes, reparations is the long game, but if you look specifically at that SCOTUS ruling on race-based admission, that left the door wide open to narrow the scope to those that were specifically harmed.
So from my read of the opinion, I do remember the door being opened for those who were attending military academies, those who were attending obviously West Point, the Naval Academy, and the like. They are not prohibited from using race as a consideration for admission. For the most part, however, all other college admissions, and we certainly are seeing that play out now in terms of the war on woke. We're seeing that play out legislatively and socially, the same way it played out judicially with the companion opinions, Students for Fair Admissions v. Harvard, Students for Fair Admissions v. University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. One a private school, the other a public institution, and some would argue the leading public institution in the United States of America. So in terms of the prohibitions on race-based considerations, I have not seen it because of harms done in the past. Just the opposite. That is something that the court has spoke against time and time when you read the affirmative action jurisprudence of years past. The race-based considerations could not be because of harms done in the past, but race-based considerations could be because of academic freedom, creating a diverse learning environment, and that enhances the learning environment for the future, not so much for the past, but the preparation of students for future leadership is enhanced by diverse peoples, diverse perspectives in the learning environment. So it's more future oriented than it is in terms of trying to restore people for harms that were done in the past.
Okay. Prophetic preaching led the Black church into politics.
Martin Luther the King, as some would say, right? Martin Luther King Jr., 1955, December 1955, in the wake of Rosa Parks acting prophetically, utilizing the training that she endured, standing up to segregation in Montgomery, Alabama. Obviously, when she was prohibited from taking a seat on the bus and she was asked to give up her seat for someone who I'll just say did not look like her, Rosa Parks decided to take a seat for justice. And that really was the beginning of the American Civil Rights Movement as we know it, right? At least the 20th century Civil Rights Movement. Days later, Martin Luther King Jr., who had the gift of oratory, the gift of education, and the gift of charisma, gave a wonderful address at Holt Street Baptist Church that literally moved America and that took the Black church from a place of, I don't want to say complacency, but took the Black church into a place of social activism, into prophetic leadership. And because of the moral position that he advocated, the Black church led the church universal into social activism or into prophetic leadership. And of course, there are other denominations and other faith groups, Muslims, Jews, and the like, that joined in the fight for human equality. But Martin Luther King Jr.'s leadership in December of 1955, his prophetic preaching as part of that prophetic leadership domain I talked about earlier, is really what led the Black church into the civil rights movement and ultimately the church universal into the civil rights movement too.
Do you see us where we are right now? I know our church is already in it, but we're just one church.
Yeah.
You see where we can get a mobilization of churches like we had back in the civil rights time era to do this again, to for us to come on one accord and say, look, we're not taking this anymore. These I mean, somehow to support Tennessee, those two brothers in there, because I mean, they look like they're getting beat up every day.
The Justins, yeah, the Justins are out on the front lines, right?
Yeah.
I think it is incumbent upon organizations, ministerial organizations. In Durham, for example, the IMA, the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance, among others, to work together, to work collectively to address their common issues. And their common issues, obviously, are the issues that predominate among their congregants, among the congregations that the respective ministers serve. Again, I go back to chapter 1 of When Prophets Preach, however. I adopt a 5-tier check the block, if you will, articulated by Eric McDaniel, a very dear friend of mine who is also an AME professor of political science at the University of Texas. In his book, Politics in the Pews, a University of Michigan Press book, Sister Pam, but Politics in the Pews, I cite him in using a checklist of when is it the right chemistry. Is the pastor, number one, willing to use his or her personal stature to influence the congregation and say we need to move in a political direction? Is the congregation receptive to that, or does the congregation say, no, don't give me salvation, don't give me social equity in the kingdom at hand, only give me salvation in the kingdom to come? Those are the first two things. There's got to be a good mix. And if there is a mix there, is there a willingness then to utilize resources? As you know, at St. Joseph, for example, when we have souls to the polls, not only is there a good mix of pastor and parishioner, but we also utilize resources in a very nonpartisan way, I might add, to say any and everybody who needs a ride to vote.
Right.
If you need a ride, call this number. We're picking you up to vote. That's right. Utilization of the church's resources. We're not asking anyone who you're voting for before we give you a ride. We're encouraging all people to be engaged in the political process, because that's what social justice really is all about.
And I have to put our plug in that we invited Mark Robinson and everybody to come to the church on Souls to the Polls to speak before the people. And if you gonna come, you could come. You know, it didn't matter. It was definitely nonpartisan. Definitely.
Right.
Definitely so. So, Pastor Jay, I want to bring up this point. I saw this one note that I had put for myself. When the governors of Florida and Texas put immigrants on buses and sent people to Martha's Vineyard, then they sent a whole bunch of people. I mean, they have sent a gazillion people to New York City.
Also outside the vice president's residence. Yes, those 3 places. You're absolutely correct.
They sure did. I think they went outside of VP Kamala Harris's house at least twice.
Correct. Correct.
So, where's the Christianity in that Christian in those behaviors? Because they lied to the people and said, oh, when you get there, you'll have a job and food and whatever. And they got there and nobody knew that they were even coming. And so it was a mess. I do think in the instance in Massachusetts on Martha's Vineyard, I do think that a church got involved and they quickly helped resolve the issue. I believe that New York is still at a crisis level, what have you. What can the church do in those situations, do you think?
So if there is a willingness, again, the same matrix, if you will, if the pastor, usually as the under shepherd, if you will, of the church, is willing to be engaged in politics, that does not just mean preaching politics, preaching fairness and equity, but it means living out a ministry of fairness and equity. If the pastor is willing to use his or her social resources, social influence with the congregation, if the congregation is receptive to that, a congregation certainly should give welcome to immigrants who are in need of assistance. They certainly should provide resources similar to at St. Joseph. Of course, we are well known in Durham for our feeding ministry, well known for the clothing that we provide for people to help. Some of the most loving people you will ever want to meet are members of St. Joseph AME Church, who would give any and everything they have. Yes, you should be proud. You should be proud, but give any and everything they have to help someone else. Well, many of the people in need are immigrants in this day and age, right? They are our siblings too. So churches certainly can engage in helping others, and they need not fear legal repercussions for doing so. There are protections that are in place for churches that attempt to help immigrants. There are many opportunities that churches can have to pool their resources to help those who are in need. So that is certainly one thing I would suggest, among many, but one thing I certainly would suggest that congregations do if they care to be political, not partisan, but if they care to be engaged into politics. Again, if you look at it from the opposite perspective, there certainly are some pastors that will close the door and say, no, 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 I'm not going to be involved in that. It's too controversial. It's too, quote unquote, political. There's some congregations that would not want to be involved in something that is, quote unquote, political. I'm proud that at St. Joseph, we are just the opposite. As you will recall, we've had combined sessions with an imam, a Muslim imam, and Jewish rabbis to talk about anti-Semitism and to try to raise the volume on things, the discord that's happened in Durham and other places in the country. We've worked to address some hard issues rather than simply the easy issues, because we are a congregation that has not been ashamed and not been afraid to use its resources, hopefully for social betterment, to be political, but not to be partisan. So again, it's a matter of whether the pastor and congregation are willing to utilize their social standing, utilize their resources, and be of help to others.
Right. We have a question here, a comment. They say our Black men are thinking of supporting the character of Trump, rather rejecting someone who has demonstrated such disdain for us.
Yeah, I have seen literature that says that a certain segment of the population, yes, is in favor of or a segment that traditionally would have been on one side, Black men voting Democratic, are now looking at Donald Trump. I don't know why. I don't know anything that's appealing about Donald Trump. That's my personal politics. That's my personal look at his leadership. I think he's been anything but a leader. I think he's been somebody who's targeted America in terms of America's destruction, America's downfall. I think he's been the worst president we possibly could have ever had. Those are my personal opinions as a Black man. So what is appealing about him? I certainly don't know it, but everybody has a right to vote. And as long as everybody has a right to vote, and as long as all votes are counted, I'm good. That's when democracy plays out. So I hope through the process of political advocacy, I, as a leader and among others, will be able to change some of those people, change some of their mindsets, and hopefully, I'm pledged support for Joe Biden. I think he has delivered for America. I think he's done a wonderful job for America in spite of circumstances. And I think if nothing else, he needs to toot his horn more, because more and more people need to know the things he's done for America. That's my personal partisan perspective, right? That's not something I'm gonna share on Sunday mornings, but I do recognize what your what the listener or what the viewer has shared there.
One more here. How do we encourage or push not only our churches but the Divine Nine? You're talking to the right person, the Divine Nine, and other social organizations to advocate more full-throated for our people.
Yeah, I am. I proudly serve as the general chaplain of Alpha Phi Alpha. It was 33 years ago. I was initiated at my fraternity's Beta chapter at Howard University, and I have been active the entire time of my membership. I love me some A-Phi A. One of our social programs is a voteless people is a hopeless people. And I'm sure every organization has something. It'll be a different name, obviously, but a focus on civic engagement. The challenge, we get together, we do strolls to the polls, we step to the polls, we rally one another, and it feels good. It looks great on social media. It looks great in the news captions. And it's powerful when we get those demographics to vote, right? But the challenge I think we have is to reach beyond the Divine Nine.
Yeah.
We have now, as you know, at St. Joseph, and we're certainly proud here in North Carolina, we're organizing with the Prince Hall Masons. We're organizing with other fraternal organizations that may have a deeper reach into the community, more so from the less so from the ivory tower, and more into the community. If you understand what I'm saying, it is our intention to mobilize everyone, as Fannie Lou Hamer once said. Not just the PhDs, but the people with no Ds, right? We want to mobilize everyone. So I think that's the challenge, right, in the past. But the focus now is to mobilize everybody, to interest them in voting, to make sure they're registered to vote, and make sure they have opportunity to vote.
Pastor Jay, that's my line, sister.
I see. Go ahead on, my good sister. Go ahead on.
As I have on my shirt today.
All good.
I see you saying, Alicia. I see you. She served in the Navy for 20 plus years as a naval nurse.
Oh, all right. My fellow veteran. I love it. All right.
Yeah, that's right. That's one thing I missed on your bio.
Don't try to read it bio. I would just say to Alicia is the name.
Yes, Alicia Baker Rogers. Yes.
All right, Sister Alicia. There she is, Alicia Baker Rogers. I will just say proudly, I was an infantry officer in the United States Army. 4 years of my life, I used to jump out of planes and rappel out of choppers. And then I went to law school and did some other stuff after that. But thank you for your service, my good sister. Thank you for your service.
Yes. Yeah, she is wonderful. We have known each other since high school.
All right.
To Michigan together.
From the D. That's right. From the D.
Yeah, from Detroit.
That's all right.
Audience, I gotta share with you. Oh, she says, thank you for your service too. Okay. I gotta share with you some things about Pastor Jay so you can get his books. Because let me tell you, you have got to get his books. Let's see here. Okay, here it is. All right. Do you see them? Do you see them?
I see an Amazon link. It looks like there's an Amazon link.
Okay, you don't see the When Prophets Preach and all that good stuff?
No, don't see any images.
Oh. Huh. Let me see. Do you see it?
There you go. There you go. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for this PR. Thank you for this PR.
So you can go on Amazon. Now, this book, The Keys Are Being Passed, this one was published like 10 years ago, right?
Absolutely. 10 years ago. Exactly. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But these two books right here, I haven't gotten this one yet, but I have these two. And let me tell you, both are excellent. This book right here, I'm going to tell you, Pastor Jay, you are stepping on toes, crunching bones and everything. And this is The Prophets Preach. So you guys can go get these at, you know what? You should ask your bookstores if they have it so they can carry it, particularly Black bookstores. I hate to order things off of Amazon, but I got mine from Amazon, I have to confess. But if I can though I got Cough and Reconciliation, I did buy it from a local bookstore here in Durham. I did. But When Prophets Preach, I got it from Amazon. Okay. And so let's see. It's one other thing I want to share. Do you see your website?
No, I see me. No, that's all right.
Yeah, you see yourself, Jay Augustine.
No, I see the stream, our live feed.
Okay. Let me go back. Let me try again.
If it's easier, I can just tell our listeners I am at jayaugustine.com, www.jayaugustine.com. Okay.
Well, I don't know what happened. I had it all set up. You still don't see it?
No. Thank you for your thoughtfulness. That's all right. Thank you for your thoughtfulness.
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to show off your picture and all that stuff, your website. But anyways, I wanted people to see that. But check him out and listen to all of those who will hear the replay, to those NABJ members that I have tagged. Please contact Pastor Jay. You can contact him through me if you like, so that you can utilize him for your reporting on the elections. Okay? All right. A lot of you guys have much bigger national platforms, and I hope that you will take that advice because obviously you have seen how he is presented and would be very good on your programs. All
Thank you.
right. You are welcome. You are welcome. I don't see anything else in the chat, Pastor Jay. Any closing thoughts that you might have that you want to leave the people?
I am grateful to you as a journalist, and I'm thankful that more and more people are taking an interest in Christian nationalism and finding out what it is and how detrimental it is to our society. 2024 is an election year, and we hear time and time again, this is the most consequential election of our lifetimes. This really is, because democracy is on the line. So I'm so thankful to have been with you tonight, and I appreciate you more than words can say.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we're going to wave goodnight to everyone. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Thank you.